welcome to your second lesson on why the colonists were moving closer and closer to declaring their independence from Great Britain. We're going to start with a conflict that erupted in the Ohio Valley. By this point, the colonists were well established, and some of the colonists began to desire moving west across the Appalachian Mountains and into a region known as the Ohio Valley. Take a look at this map. The Ohio Valley is the region between the Ohio River and the Mississippi River. A major problem, though, is that both France and England claimed this area. In 1754, the French wanted to really stake their claim to this territory, so they built a fort. The fort was built near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you're sitting there thinking, how does building a fort in Pennsylvania help the French claim the Ohio Valley? You have to understand that the French were building a fort at the eastern point of the Ohio Valley so that they could claim everything west. Let's take another look at the map. You will see that the Ohio River starts near Pittsburgh and flows west to the Mississippi River over in Illinois. So the fort that the French built near Pittsburgh was called Fort Duquesne. Now, news of this fort reached the governor of Virginia, and he was more than concerned. He was alarmed, as in, this is not going to happen in my backyard. The French were too close for comfort, so the governor sent a small militia group to drive the French out of the Ohio Valley. Just so you know, militias are small armies of citizens who were trained to fight in an emergency. The governor chose a 22-year-old volunteer by the name of George Washington to lead the militia group. At this point in history, George Washington was just a guy full of ambition who had no money and no land to his name. Washington felt that one of his only options for advancing in society was by becoming an officer in the British Army. Washington knew that British officers didn't think very highly of American colonists, especially as soldiers, so he was determined to prove them wrong. As Washington approached Fort Duquesne, he came across a group of French soldiers out in the woods. Though shots were fired, Washington's men were able to capture the French soldiers easily. This would become the first shots fired in the French and Indian War. Let's cover some of the basics regarding the French and Indian War. This was a war that was fought between Great Britain and France for control of territory and power. The war became known as the French and Indian War because many Native Americans fought alongside the French. It wasn't the French versus the Indians. The French and the Native Americans were on the same side, fighting against the British Army. In 1755, Great Britain sent 1,400 British soldiers to Virginia to finish the job that Washington had begun. They were led by a general named Edward Braddock. The soldiers' job was to clear the French out of the Ohio Valley. Washington had joined the army as a volunteer, hoping to make a good impression on General Braddock. Now, the British uniforms were bright red. Take a look here at their British uniforms. And the French wore either a tan or blue uniform. This is what the French uniforms looked like. So when the British were marching to the Ohio Valley in their red uniforms, they were easy targets for the French and Native Americans. Nearly 2/3, now that's over 900 of the 1,400 British soldiers were killed. George Washington himself was almost killed. He led the survivors back to Virginia and was greeted as a hero. The French and Indian War lasted over 7 years. It wasn't until the British defeated the French in Canada in 1763 that the French finally signed a treaty of surrender. As part of the treaty, the French gave all of Canada to Great Britain. Great Britain now controlled a huge amount of land, and the colonists truly felt pride in being British. The colonists felt as though Great Britain saw value in the colonies and were even willing to fight a war on their behalf. Little did they know, though, that this would be the beginning of the end. This is the most English the colonists will ever feel, and it just goes downhill from this point on.